Ambassador Elias Vance had never felt so small in his entire life. He stood at the edge of the grand banquet hall of the Velkari Empire, watching hundreds of alien beings move around him like water flowing around a stone. Nobody looked at him. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody even seemed to notice he was there. The hall itself was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The ceiling rose so high that clouds actually formed near the top, soft white wisps that glowed with their own inner light. The walls were made of some kind of living crystal that shifted colors every few seconds, creating patterns that hurt his human eyes if he stared too long. The floor beneath his feet was warm and seemed to breathe, rising and falling in a gentle rhythm that matched some great heartbeat deep below the palace. Elias was 42 years old. He had spent 15 years working in diplomatic security on Earth, protecting presidents and prime ministers from threats, both foreign and domestic. He had seen things that would make most people lose sleep for weeks. He had faced death more times than he could count. But nothing had prepared him for this. Humanity had discovered faster than light travel only 18 months ago. It had been an accident, really. A young physicist in Argentina had made a mistake in her calculations, and that mistake had torn a hole in space itself. Within weeks, the governments of Earth had come together in a way they never had before. Within months, they had built their first starship. Within a year, they had made contact with the Galactic Concord, a vast alliance of hundreds of alien species that had been watching Earth for centuries, waiting for humans to take their first steps into the stars. The aliens had not been impressed. Humanity was primitive. Humanity was violent. Humanity was barely past the stage of burning dead plants for energy. The Galactic Concord had welcomed them with the kind of polite disinterest that a king might show to a beggar who wandered into his court. Yes, humans could join. Yes, humans could attend meetings. Yes, humans could send representatives to important events. But nobody expected anything from them. Nobody wanted anything from them. They were there because the rules said they had to be allowed in, not because anyone actually cared. Elias had been chosen as humanity's representative to the coronation of Queen Sithara of the Velkari Empire. It was supposed to be an honor. The Velkari were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Their empire spanned thousands of star systems. Their technology was so advanced that it looked like magic to human eyes. An invitation to the coronation of their new queen was the kind of thing that species fought wars over. But Elias knew the truth. He had been invited as a formality, a box to check. The Velkari had probably sent the same invitation to every species in the Concord, even the ones they considered beneath their notice. Especially the ones they considered beneath their notice. He looked around the hall and tried to identify the other species. There were the crystalline singers from the Void Nebula, their bodies made of living gemstone that chimed softly whenever they moved. There were the Thought Weavers of Kilos Prime, floating balls of pure mental energy contained in magnetic bubbles. There were the Hive Masters of Sector 7, massive insect-like creatures with dozens of legs and eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not even name. There were beings of fire and beings of ice, beings that breathed methane and beings that breathed pure radiation. And there was Elias, one small human in a suit that suddenly felt very cheap and very plain. He found his assigned seat after 20 minutes of searching. It was at the very back of the hall, at a small table tucked into a corner where the crystal walls blocked most of the light. To his left sat a delegate from some methane-breathing species whose name he could not pronounce. The creature existed inside a sealed environment suit and could not even turn its head to look at him. To his right was an empty chair. Apparently, whatever species had been assigned to sit there had not even bothered to show up. The message was clear. Humanity was nothing. Elias sat down and tried not to feel bitter about it. He had a job to do. His orders were simple: observe everything, say nothing, and do not embarrass humanity. The leaders back on Earth were desperate to make a good impression. They knew that humanity's survival in this new galaxy might depend on the relationships they built now in these early days. One wrong word, one foolish action, and humanity might find itself alone against threats it could not even imagine. So Elias watched. He watched the servants move through the hall, carrying trays of food that glowed and shifted and sometimes seemed to be alive. He watched the diplomats exchange greetings in languages that his translation device struggled to process. He watched the guards standing at attention near every door, their weapons gleaming with energy that made his skin tingle from across the room. And then he saw the Queen. Queen Sithara entered through a doorway that had not existed a moment before. The wall simply opened, crystal flowing like water to create a passage, and she walked through it like she was stepping out of a dream. She was 8 feet tall. Her skin was covered in scales that shimmered with every color Elias could name, and several he was sure he was only seeing because his brain could not process what was actually there. She had 4 arms, each one graceful and strong, folded across her chest in a pose of regal authority. Her eyes, all 4 of them, glowed with a soft golden light that seemed to see everything at once. On her head sat a crown that was not a crown. It was alive. Some kind of creature, perhaps a symbiote, wrapped around her skull and pulsed with bioluminescence. It changed colors in response to her moods, and right now it burned with the deep purple of ceremony and the bright gold of power. Every being in the hall stopped what they were doing. Every conversation died. Every eye turned to the Queen. She was the most magnificent thing Elias had ever seen. He understood, in that moment, why the Velkari Empire had lost it for 10,000 years. He understood why other species bent the knee to them, why wars had been fought and planets had burned just for the chance to earn their favor. Queen Sithara was not just a ruler. She was a force of nature. She was a living symbol of everything her people had achieved, and Elias was just a human, sitting alone at a forgotten table in a dark corner, watching history happen from the outside. The servants began preparing the ceremonial meal. The coronation was about to begin. Elias settled back in his chair and prepared to watch. He had no idea that in less than an hour he would be standing in front of that queen, with every eye in the galaxy upon him, committing an act that would change humanity's place in the universe forever. But that moment had not come yet. For now, he was just an insignificant guest at a party where nobody knew his name. The ceremony began with gifts. Elias watched from his distant table as ambassador after ambassador approached the throne. Each one carried something precious, something rare, something meant to show respect and earn favor with the new queen. The crystalline singers went first. They presented a song captured in solid form, a perfect diamond that contained a melody so beautiful that beings had been known to weep for days after hearing it. Queen Sithara accepted it with a nod of her magnificent head, and the diamond was placed on a pedestal beside her throne. The Thought Weavers came next. They offered a memory, extracted from the mind of their oldest elder, showing the birth of a star that had happened before the Velkari Empire even existed. The queen touched the glowing sphere and smiled, and Elias saw colors ripple across her crown, like sunset on water. Gift after gift was presented. Star maps showing routes to hidden worlds. Technology that could heal wounds in seconds. Treaties written in light that would bind whole species together for 10,000 years. Each gift was more amazing than the last, and Elias found himself leaning forward in his chair, forgetting for a moment that he was supposed to be invisible. Humanity had sent a gift too, of course. A small painting by an artist named Monet, showing water lily floating on a pond. It was beautiful by human standards, a masterpiece of light and color and feeling. But compared to the wonders being presented tonight, it might as well have been a child's drawing on a refrigerator. Elias was glad that the human gift had been presented earlier, during a smaller ceremony, where fewer beings would see how pitiful it looked next to the treasures of the elder races. He was so focused on the gifts that he almost missed it. There was a man standing in the shadows near the back of the throne platform. He wore the robes of a Valkyrie noble, dark purple, trimmed with silver, and he stood with the kind of stillness that only came from years of practice. His scales were darker than the queen's, more gray than gold, and his crown symbiote was smaller and dimmer. Lord Kethvar, the queen's uncle. Elias knew about him from his briefings. Kethvar had been next in line for the throne before Sathara was born. He had spent 40 years preparing to rule, only to have everything taken away by the birth of his brother's daughter. The Valkyrie succession laws were absolute. Direct descendants came before all others. Kethvar had no claim anymore. By all accounts, he had accepted this gracefully. He had supported his niece's rise to power. He had stood beside her during the transition period. He had done everything a loyal uncle should do. But Elias was watching him now, and something was wrong. 15 years of security work had taught Elias to read body language. Not just human body language, but the body language of dozens of alien species. He had spent months studying the Valkyrie before this mission, learning their tells, their stress indicators, their subtle signs of emotion. Lord Kethvar's inner eyelids were flickering too fast. That meant anxiety. His secondary heart, visible as a slight pulse in his neck, was beating faster than normal. That meant excitement or fear. His hands, all 4 of them, were clasped behind his back in a way that looked relaxed, but was actually hiding tension in his fingers, and he kept looking at the servants preparing the ceremonial meal. Elias shifted his attention to the meal preparation. In Valkyrie tradition, the first food eaten by a new ruler was sacred. It was called the Meal of Ascension, and it had to be prepared exactly according to rituals that were thousands of years old. The main dish was a type of bread called vinash, made from grain that only grew on the Valkyrie homeworld. Only the queen would eat it. Only she would receive its blessing. A servant was preparing the bread now. She was young, her scales still bright with youth, and her hands moved with practiced grace as she arranged the food on a golden plate. But Elias noticed something. Her hands were trembling. Just slightly, just barely visible, but they were definitely trembling. That was strange. These servants had trained for years. They did not tremble. Elias looked at the bread itself. It was round and flat, golden brown, with a pattern pressed into the surface that looked like a sun rising over mountains. It looked perfect. It looked exactly like the pictures he had seen in his briefing materials, but something was wrong with the color. He blinked and looked again. The bread was golden brown, yes, but there was something else there. A slight discoloration near the center, a patch that was just slightly different from the rest. It was so subtle that he almost thought he was imagining it. The strange lighting in the hall made everything look different, and his human eyes were not designed for this place. But no, he was not imagining it. The color was wrong. Elias had read something in his xenobiology briefings about human vision. Humans, it turned out, had unusually good color perception compared to most galactic species. Something about the way Earth had evolved, the particular wavelengths of light from the sun, had given humans the ability to see subtle differences in color that other beings simply could not detect. Most species saw the universe in broader strokes. Humans saw details. He looked at the bread again. The discoloration was in exactly the spot where the queen would take her first bite. And the color, that slightly off shade of gold, matched something he had read about in his toxicology briefings. Valanash spores. Poison so deadly that a single exposure could kill a Valkyrie within hours. A poison so sophisticated that it was almost impossible to detect because it mimicked structure of Venash grain at the molecular level. A poison that had been used in exactly 3 assassinations in the past 1,000 years. And only because the assassins had confessed afterward. No scanner could detect it. No test could find it. The only way to know it was there was to see it. To notice the tiny color difference that existed at exactly 580 nanometers of the light spectrum, a wavelength that most galactic species could not perceive, but humans could. Elias looked at Lord Kethfer. The old noble was smiling now, a small and satisfied smile that he probably thought no one could see. He was waiting. He was watching the servant carry the plate of bread toward the throne. He was watching. His niece prepared to die. And no one else in the entire hall had any idea what was about to happen. Elias felt his heart begin to pound. He had a choice to make. He could stay silent, follow his orders, and watch the queen die. No one would ever know that a human could have saved her. Humanity would remain invisible, insignificant, safe in its obscurity. Or he could speak. The servant placed the plate before the queen. The bread sat there, golden and perfect and deadly, waiting to be eaten. Queen Sithara reached for it with her upper right hand. Elias made his choice. The queen's fingers were inches from the bread when Elias stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor cut through the silence of the hall like a knife. Every head turned toward him. Every eye found the small human in the dark corner, who had just done the unthinkable. No one moved during the moment of ascension. It was the most sacred part of the ceremony. The queen was about to eat the blessed bread, to receive the blessing of her ancestors, to formally become the ruler of 10,000 worlds. To interrupt this moment was not just rude. It was not just disrespectful. It was a crime punishable by death. And Elias was walking forward. He moved between the tables, past ambassadors who stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. A crystalline singer cracked along her stress lines, tiny fractures appearing in her gemstone body. A thought weaver contracted into a tight sphere, its mental energy flickering with alarm. The insect-like hive masters clicked their mandibles in what might have been shock or might have been hunger. Guards rushed toward him from every direction. They were Velkari warriors, 8 feet tall, and armed with weapons that could reduce him to ash in a microsecond. Their scales were dark red, the color of blood, and their eyes burned with the promise of violence. Elias did not stop. He did not slow down. He kept walking toward the throne, toward the queen, toward certain death. The first guard reached him and grabbed his arm. The alien's grip was like iron, strong enough to crush bone, and Elias felt pain shoot through his entire body. But he did not fight. He did not resist. He just opened his mouth and spoke. His voice carried across the silent hall with a clarity that surprised even him. Years of security work had taught him how to project authority, how to make himself heard in chaos, how to cut through noise and fear with pure, calm certainty. Do not consume that meal. The words hung in the air like a physical thing. The guard holding him froze. The other guards froze. The entire hall seemed to stop breathing. Queen Sethra's hand hovered over the bread. Her 4 golden eyes turned to look at Elias, and in that moment, he understood what it meant to be seen by a god. Her gaze was not angry. It was not confused. It was simply absolute, a weight pressing down on him that made it hard to think, hard to breathe, hard to exist. When she spoke, her voice was death itself. You dare? 2 words. Just 2 words. But they contained the full weight of her authority, the power of 10,000 years of empire, the promise of consequences that went beyond mere execution. No one interrupted the moment of ascension. No one had ever interrupted the moment of ascension. The human had just committed a crime that had no precedent, and therefore had no limit to its punishment. Elias felt the guard's grip tighten on his arm. He felt the weapons of a dozen warriors pointing at his back. He felt the eyes of every being in the hall burning into him, waiting to see him destroyed. But he also felt something else. Certainty. Pure and absolute certainty. He had seen the poison. He knew what it would do. And he was not going to let this queen die, just because he was afraid. "The bread contains Velanash spores," he said. His voice did not shake. His hands did not tremble. He stood before the most powerful being he had ever encountered, seconds away from death, and he spoke as calmly as if he were giving a weather report. "It is fatal to your species within 6 hours. It is undetectable by your technology because it mimics the sacred grain at the molecular level." A murmur ran through the crowd. Velanash spores were known, feared, legendary, but they were supposed to be impossible to detect. How could this primitive human claim to have seen them? Queen Sethra's crown symbiote flickered with colors Elias could not name. She was thinking, processing, considering. She had not yet ordered his death. That was something. "Impossible," said a voice from the crowd. One of the elder ambassadors, a being made of living flame, flickered with disbelief. "No scanner can detect Velanash contamination. No test can find it. This human speaks lies to disrupt our sacred ceremony." "I did not use a scanner," Elias said. He pointed to his own eyes. "I saw it. Humans can perceive light at wavelengths that most species cannot. At 580 nanometers, the contaminated bread shows a slight discoloration that your eyes are physically incapable of detecting." He turned and pointed across the hall, directly at Lord Kethfer. "He cannot see it either," which is why he thought his plan was perfect. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of ceremony. It was the silence of realization, of horror, of pieces falling into place. Lord Kethfer's face went pale. His scales, which had been dark gray, faded to an almost white color that Elias recognized from his briefings as extreme stress. His secondary heart, visible in his neck, began pounding so hard that everyone nearby could see it. "This is absurd," he said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I am the Queen's loyal servant. I would never. Your inner eyelids have been flickering since the ceremony began," Elias said. "Your secondary heart rate is elevated. You positioned yourself in the shadows where you could watch the bread being prepared without being seen. And when the servant placed the plate before the Queen, you smiled." Every eye in the hall turned to Kethfor. "Lies," the old noble shouted. "The primitive is trying to cause chaos. He should be executed immediately." Queen Sithara raised one of her 4 hands. The gesture was small, almost casual, but it silenced everything. Even Kethfer stopped speaking. "Bring me a scanner," she said. A scientist rushed forward, a Valkyrie in the white robes of the Imperial Academy. He carried a device that looked like a flat crystal disc, and he ran it over the bread with trembling hands. "Nothing," he said. "The scanner shows nothing." "Of course it shows nothing," Elias said. "The poison is designed to be invisible to your technology, but it is not invisible to my eyes. Take a sample. Put it under a spectrum analyzer set to 580 nanometers. You will see exactly what I saw." The scientist looked at the Queen. She nodded. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. Elias stood there, still held by the guard, still surrounded by weapons, still waiting to learn if he would be proven right or executed for his crime. Then the scientist looked up from his equipment. His face had gone pale. "Velanash contamination confirmed," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Fatal dosage. The human is correct." The hall exploded into chaos. Guards seized Lord Kethfer. The old noble screamed and fought, but there were too many of them, and they were too strong. Ambassadors shouted questions and accusations. The servant who had prepared the bread collapsed to her knees, weeping. But Queen Sithara did not move. She sat on her throne, looking at Elias with those 4 golden eyes. And he could not read what she was thinking at all. Her crown symbiote flickered through 100 colors in a few seconds, emotions too complex for him to understand. The guard released his arm. The weapons lowered. Everyone was staring at him now, but not with contempt anymore. They were staring at him with something else entirely. The primitive human had just saved the queen of the Valkyrie Empire, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Lord Kethver broke within the hour. The interrogation happened in a chamber deep beneath the palace, far from the chaos of the banquet hall. Elias was not present for it, but he heard about it later. The Valkyrie had methods of extracting truth that did not rely on pain or drugs. They had technology that could read the patterns of a brain, that could pull memories from a mind whether the owner wanted to share them or not. Kethver confessed everything. He had planned this for 30 years. Ever since his niece was born and his dreams of ruling the empire had died. He had spent decades pretending to be loyal, pretending to be content with his fate, pretending to love the girl who had taken everything from him. All the while, he had been searching for a way to kill her that could never be traced back to him. The Volanash spores had been perfect. They were almost impossible to obtain, but Kethver had connections in the criminal underworld of a dozen species. He had paid a fortune to acquire them. He had paid another fortune to have them modified, engineered to be even more undetectable than they already were. No scanner in the galaxy could find them. No test could reveal them. Even the most advanced technology of the elder races would show nothing but ordinary bread. Kethver had tested it dozens of times. He had been certain. He had never considered that a primitive species from a backwater planet might be able to see what his eyes could not. The servant who had prepared the bread was named Velsara. She was young, barely past her first century, and she had been Kethver's lover for the past 5 years. He had promised her power and wealth and a place at his side when he became regent after the queen's death. She had believed him because she had wanted to believe him, and she had let love blind her to the monster she was helping. She confessed too, weeping the entire time. She had not wanted to hurt anyone. She had just wanted to be special, to be important, to be loved. Kethver had given her all of those things, and in return she had helped him commit the greatest crime in Valkyrie history. The punishment for assassination of a monarch was total. Kethver and Velsara were both sentenced to the Void, a prison outside of normal space where time did not flow and death could not come. They would float there forever, conscious and aware and utterly alone. Until the universe itself ended. It was considered merciful by Valkyrie standards. While the investigation continued, Elias was kept in a guest chamber in the palace. It was not a prison cell, but it was not freedom either. Guards stood outside his door all times. Servants brought him food and water, but no one spoke to him beyond what was necessary. He did not know what was going to happen to him. He had saved the queen's life, yes, but he had also committed a serious crime. Interrupting the moment of ascension was unforgivable, even if his reasons had been good. There were those in the court who argued that he should be rewarded. There were others who argued that he should still be executed. The law was the law, they said, and no exception could be made. On the 3rd day, the queen summoned him. Elias was escorted through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The palace was enormous, larger than some cities on Earth, and every surface was covered with crystal and gold and things that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Servants and nobles stopped and stared as he passed. He was famous now, whether he wanted to be or not. The throne room was empty, except for the queen. She sat on her great chair, 8 feet of scaled majesty, her forearms resting on the armrests like weapons waiting to be used. Her crown symbiote glowed with a steady golden light that matched her eyes. She looked tired, Elias realized. The past 3 days had been hard on her. Discovering that her own uncle had wanted her dead, he approached the throne and knelt, because that seemed like the right thing to do. "Rise," she said. Her voice was softer than he remembered from the banquet hall. Less like death and more like wind through ancient trees. "You have knelt enough for one lifetime, I think." Elias stood. He looked up at her and waited. "I have been thinking about you," she said. "About what you did. About why you did it." She tilted her head, studying him with all 4 eyes. "My advisors cannot agree on how to handle you. Some say you are a hero who should be celebrated. Others say you are a criminal who should be punished. The law does not know what to do with a being who commits a terrible crime in order to prevent a greater one." "I understand," Elias said. "Whatever you decide, I accept it." "I knew the consequences when I stood up. Did you?" The Queen leaned forward slightly. "Did you really understand what you were risking? Your life? Your career? Your species' place in the Galactic Concord?" Elias thought about the question. He had asked himself the same thing 100 times over the past 3 days. Why had he done it? What had possessed him to throw away everything, to risk starting a war between humanity and one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, all for a queen he had never met? "I saw someone about to die," he said finally. "I could have stopped it. So I did. That simple?" "That simple." The Queen was silent for a long moment. Her crown symbiote flickered through colors that Elias could not read, emotions and thoughts beyond his understanding. "Your species gains nothing from saving me," she said. "You are beneath notice. You are primitive. You are weak. You could have let me die, and no one would have suspected humanity. Another species would have taken the blame. You would have remained invisible, safe in your obscurity. Why sacrifice that?" Elias thought of Earth. He thought of his family, his friends, the billions of humans who did not even know this night was happening. He thought of all the times in human history when people had faced the same choice he had faced: stay safe and let evil happen, or stand up and risk everything. "Where I come from," he said, "we have a saying. The measure of a person is not how they treat the powerful. It is how they treat those who can do nothing for them." The Queen stared at him. "You could do something for us," he continued. "Your empire could crush Earth without even trying. Your technology could solve problems we have struggled with for centuries. Your favor could open doors that we cannot even imagine. But that is not why I saved you." "Then why?" "Because you invited us to your table," Elias said. "Even though we are primitive. Even though we are weak. Even though we had nothing to offer you and no way to repay your hospitality. You treated us with dignity when you had no reason to. That meant something." The Queen did not respond. She just sat there, looking at him, and Elias had the strange feeling that something very important was happening inside her head. Then, slowly, she smiled. "I think," she said, "that the galaxy has made a terrible mistake about your species." She rose from her throne and descended the steps toward him. She stopped when they were face to face, her 8 feet of height towering over his mere 6 feet. Her golden eyes looking down at him with something that might have been respect. "The law requires punishment for your crime," she said. "But the Queen can grant exceptions." She reached out with her upper right hand and placed it on his shoulder. Her touch was warm and surprisingly gentle. "Ambassador Elias Vance of Earth," she said, "I name you Friend of the Throne. The first non-Valkyrie to hold that title in 1,000 years. You are no longer a guest in this empire. You are family." Elias felt something shift in the air around them. Energy crackled across his skin, and for a moment he saw colors that did not exist. Patterns of light that seemed to write themselves into reality. The Queen had just changed the rules of the galaxy. and humanity had just taken its first real step into the stars. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass within hours of the Queen's announcement. Every species in the Galactic Concord had heard the story. The primitive humans, the youngest and weakest members of the Alliance, had saved the Valkyrie Queen from assassination. They had detected a poison that no technology could find. They had done the impossible, and they had been rewarded with the title of Friend of the Throne. Elias did not fully understand what that title meant until the invitations started arriving. Ambassadors who had ignored him at the coronation now requested meetings. Species that had not even bothered to send representatives to humanity's welcoming ceremony now offered trade agreements and defensive pacts. The small table in the dark corner where he had been seated was replaced with a place at the high table, right next to the elder races, who had shaped the galaxy for millions of years. The methane-breathing delegate who had sat beside him, unable to even turn its head in his direction, sent him a formal apology written in the most complex and respectful form of its language. The empty chair on his other side was filled by a rotating stream of ambassadors, who suddenly found humans very interesting. Indeed, Elias returned to Earth 3 weeks after the coronation. He expected to find his planet the same as he had left it, small and blue and uncertain about its place in the universe. Instead, he found everything changed. The story had reached Earth before him. The news networks had been running it constantly, trying to explain to confused humans why their representative had almost started a war and ended up saving an alien queen. Most people did not fully understand what had happened. They just knew that one of their own had done something important. Elias was asked to speak at the United Nations. He told the whole story, from his lonely seat in the corner, to his walk toward the throne, to his conversation with Queen Sithara. When he finished, the assembly was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping, and soon the entire hall was on its feet. He tried to explain that he was not a hero. He had just done what anyone would have done. But people did not want to hear that. They wanted a symbol, a story they could tell themselves about humanity's place in the stars. They wanted to believe that being small and young and primitive did not mean being weak or worthless. Maybe. Elias thought they were right to believe that the months that followed brought changes that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Concord, which had ignored humanity for 18 months, suddenly discovered that humans had value after all. It started with scientists. Researchers from a dozen species came to Earth to study human biology, particularly human vision. They discovered that humans could see colors and patterns that most galactic species could not perceive. Evolution on Earth had taken a different path, creating eyes that were sensitive to wavelengths that had no use to beings who had evolved under different suns. This was not just interesting. It was useful. There were problems in galactic science that had remained unsolved for thousands of years, because no one could see the relevant data. Human scientists, working alongside their alien counterparts, began solving those problems within months. But vision was just the beginning. The Concord discovered that humans had other unusual abilities. They could run for hours without stopping, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Most species could only sprint in short bursts. They could survive injuries that would kill beings twice their size, healing from wounds that should have been fatal. They could eat foods that were poisonous to almost everyone else, processing toxins that would destroy other digestive systems. And then there was the strangest human trait of all, their ability to bond with anything. Humans formed emotional connections with other humans, of course, but they also formed emotional connections with animals, with plants, with machines, with abstract concepts. They gave names to their vehicles and talked to their pets and cried when fictional characters died in stories. This seemed absurd to most galactic species, who formed bonds only with their own kind and viewed everything else as tools to be used. But it turned out that this trait had unexpected advantages. Humans were natural diplomats because they could genuinely care about beings completely different from themselves. They were natural explorers because they could find joy in alien landscapes that others found boring or frightening. They were natural allies because when they said they would stand by you, they meant it with their entire beings. 6 months after the coronation, Queen Sithara invited Elias back to the palace. This time, he was not seated at a forgotten table in a dark corner. He was seated at her right hand, in the place of honor reserved for the Empire's closest friends. The ceremony was for the signing of a formal alliance between the Valkyrie Empire and the human species. Not a polite formality, not a treaty of convenience, but a true alliance of equals. The Valkyrie would share their technology with humanity. Humanity would share its unique abilities with the Valkyrie. Both species would defend each other against any threat. As Elias pressed his thumb to the treaty document, leaving a human fingerprint alongside the Queen's scale mark, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. 18 months ago, humanity had been alone in the universe, convinced that they were special, convinced that they mattered. Then they had discovered the Galactic Concord, and they had learned just how small and insignificant they really were. But they had been wrong about what made a species matter. The elder races had measured humanity by their technology. They had looked at human starships and found them primitive. They had looked at human weapons and found them weak. They had looked at human science and found it laughable. By every measure that the Concord valued, humans were failures. But there were other measures. There were other ways to judge the worth of a people. Humanity had character. Humanity had courage. Humanity had the ability to see what others could not see, to feel what others could not feel, to stand up for what was right, even when it cost them everything. Those were the things that mattered. Queen Sithara stood beside him as the treaty was sealed. Her crown symbiote glowed with the bright gold of happiness, and her 4 eyes sparkled with something that looked very much like affection. "Your species will go far," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "Not because of your ships or your weapons, but because you looked at a room full of beings who dismissed you, and you still chose to save one of them." Elias smiled. "That is just what humans do, Your Majesty." She nodded slowly. "I know. I think I am beginning to understand." The ceremony ended. The ambassadors departed. The galaxy continued to turn, but everything was different now. The primitive humans, the youngest members of the Concord, had proven themselves in a way that no one had expected. They had shown that strength was not just about power and technology. It was about heart. It was about character. It was about being willing to do the right thing even when no one was watching, even when there was nothing to gain. The Galactic Concord had made a critical error in their assessment of Earth's children. They had measured humanity's worth in starships and terraformers and weapons of war. They should have measured it in character. In the years that followed, humanity would grow and change and take its place among the stars. They would build greater ships. They would develop better technology. They would become powerful in all the ways that the elder races respected. But they would never forget the lesson of the coronation. They would never forget that their greatest moment had come not from a feat of strength or science, but from a simple act of courage by an insignificant man who would refuse to let evil win. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. That was humanity's place among the stars. And it was only the beginning.